This is Yonder. Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Robbins, and this is episode 63 of the Yonder podcast, where we talk to company leaders and big thinkers about how to make remote work work. We're focused on expanding the remote work job market and helping listeners to create happy, productive, distributed teams. This week, we're talking to Frank Cottle, who is the CEO and founder of the Alliance Business Group, which runs Alliance virtual offices and co-working spaces all around the world. Frank's been doing this for over 40 years. So he's a veteran of remote work and has lots of thoughts and ideas and observations, and is able to sort of look back into the history of remote work and kind of help us understand, help us understand the history of it, but also help us understand sort of where things are going in the future, including some really interesting ideas that I hadn't really thought about before, like virtual reality workspaces and things like that. So interesting conversation with Frank Cottle coming up. If you're not already subscribed to the Yonder newsletter, yonder.io/newsletter is where you should go to subscribe. And we will send you updates about podcasts and articles and things that we found around the web to keep you informed about the remote work world. Stay on the cutting edge, know the latest things, keep up with what everyone's talking about, or what some people are talking about that you should also be talking about. We'll keep you updated. Yonder.io/newsletter is where you can go to subscribe for that. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the podcast, if you're not getting it downloaded in your podcast listening app or device, every time it comes out, you can do that at yonder.io/ as well, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. You'll find links for all those things there. So go do that. All right, let's talk to Frank Cottle. Hi, Frank. Thanks for coming on the Yonder podcast.
Well, my pleasure, Jeff.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. First of all, why don't you tell people where you're talking to us from?
Well, today I'm in Newport Beach in Southern California. It's a bright, sunny day, and the ocean's lovely.
I'm jealous. I'm in New England here, where we're sort of in that stage where we think that we're thawing out, and then things freeze up and more snow falls, and then that thaws out. So it's just a lot of slush, really.
And I'm already putting on my spring or summer wetsuit for surfing.
Well, yes, I actually should get out my winter wetsuit and maybe make the most of just this wet weather in Rhode Island and go out. Once you've been out,
you look kind of silly driving around in it, though, I got to say.
Well, you can't get out of it at the beach. Let's see. So, why don't you introduce yourself to people? You're sort of involved in a bunch of different things. How do you explain that to people?
Well, I try not to, or I'd say usually with a margarita, it goes over better. I'm the founding chairman and CEO of the Alliance Business Centers group of companies. We've been in the serviced office industry, flexible workspace sector, co-working, all of those sorts of things in one form or another for 40 years now. We're one of the founders of the industry going back to the late 70s, early 80s. We've always led with technology as a company. Before we started this company, I basically raced yachts and worked as a commercial diver is when I started my career.
Wow.
If you want to say I've been doing remote work, since 1969 or 70, because managing crews, managing logistics, all of those things is just something that I've done all of my life.
Well, let's start there then. Let's kind of dig in. I mean, what did remote work look like back in the, well, you say you started in this business 40 years ago, but around then, and even, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I suppose, pre dial-up modems even, right?
Oh, yes, yes. Well,
Yeah.
it's funny. When we first started, you'll laugh at this. The very first project that we actually had a telex, and because that was the most effective way to transmit contracts overseas. So we've seen everything from 300 baud modems where you took the handset of your phone and stuck it onto the modem, on up through.
What is
we have today.
I'm trying to remember what a telex machine was. It's pre fax, right? But
Yes,
it was a little
pre-fax
computer monitor kind of thing.
No, it looked like a keyboard. It was a keyboard, and you've seen it. Pictures, old teletypes.
Yeah.
The old movies where you see the stock tickers going and the teletype tape coming. Well, that is the telex is the more modern version of that, but you still had a ticker tape, and it read everything into it. And it really is
how like reporters would
analog
stories.
It's just an analog keyboard.
Yeah,
really. But when we built our very first center, we built in 1979-80. We built an executive suite complex, and we started out really building the buildings too. So we started building buildings across the southwestern U.S., California, Arizona, and Texas. And even in our first building, we had video conferencing. 1980. We had, back then, in order to get the systems to speak to each other, they're all different. We had to have a contract for with a codex and all sorts of things, so the systems could talk to each other. Cost you about $125 an hour to have a video call on each end. Each end.
Yeah.
Still cheaper than flying, though. We also set up a joint venture right when we started the company with Bell Labs. That's when guys were running around in white coats and plastic pocket protectors with their slide rules. We were the first commercial installation that simultaneously broadcast voice and data over 4-pair twisted cable. So in our very first buildings, on every desktop, we had a voice and data terminal interconnected with a large mini computer on site in our server room, and a large digital switch, one of the first digital switches built. And we custom built a piece of hardware with Bell Labs called a Mux box, so we could use the same 4-pair twisted cable today. So that was really the leading edge of network management. And that was all done in 1980. And you have to remember, 1980, you didn't have PCs.
No, not at home.
We had terminals on every desk, simultaneous voice and data, built-in word processing, built-in really a suite of services, email, etc.
So terminals, meaning they were connected to a central mainframe computer that was in the basement of the building.
That is correct.
Right.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And so we pushed that edge and found out that we were just too far ahead of ourselves. After half a dozen buildings like that, we said, wait a second. Nobody understands what we're doing here. They love it, but they won't pay us anymore for it. And then we did the first commercial installation of ISDN too, with GTE. It was sort of like the old Edison and Watson test. Their building was on one side of the parking lot and our building was on the other. And we said, can you hear me now?
Right.
Yes.
Not only can I hear you, I hear you in high quality.
Can you transmit some data? And so it was pioneering days.
Yeah.
But when you think of remote work, we had to have a combination of things. We had to have technology to allow it, number one. We had to have attitudes to manage it. In the forefront of the remote working era, if most managers, if they couldn't see you, they didn't think you were working.
Right.
Things were based on presence as opposed to productivity. And today we know that that's still important because community and culturally you want to be around your peers, but it has nothing to do with productivity anymore, or very little to do with productivity. The other issue around remote work was the remote worker themselves. Today, most people say, oh, I like to work remotely, or I want to work remotely some of the time. Back then, people thought they were almost getting fired if they were remote work. Oh, you're going to work remotely. Uh-oh, I'm going to get fired. I'm not on the fast track anymore. Nobody's going to see me working. I won't be able to bump into the boss. All these problems that came along.
And remote working wasn't so much, I mean, now it's oftentimes spoke of synonymously with working from home. But back then it would be the single representative that was in that city.
Oftentimes, it really was your road warrior type,
right?
Oftentimes, and with the emergence of executive suites, which they were called back then, very efficient small offices to act as branches for larger companies and things. Then remote working became much more professional, and I think our industry added that layer of professionalism and also dealt with a lot of problems around remote work. Human beings are gregarious. We like being around other human beings. Sometimes I don't know why, but we do. So all the things that we see today in co-working around community, and when we speak around building cultures inside of companies, well, that's very hard to do if everybody's a remote worker. Technology has built many bridges for that, but the physical manifestation of co-working or of community a lot of times is a co-working or a business center. And that allows us to enjoy each other's company and yet have a professional workplace environment. And there's a lot of business reasons why that's important, not just personal reasons.
Yeah. It's interesting to think of sort of the trajectory starting so far back as that. I think oftentimes we think of this about remote working as sort of something that, perhaps evolved out of high-speed internet, or maybe even just being able to, dial-up networking to be able to connect us. But it really predates all of that by quite a bit.
Well, no, it does. And I think what you're talking about when you say we is a generational issue. And all generations think they invented peace and sex. And no one remembers that they're actually standing on the shoulders of those that have come before them. So, I feel the same way. I think I invented this industry, and yet I know others that were doing like and similar things in the late 40s and early 50s.
Yeah.
So we always have to look back in order to find ourselves and to find our roots, so that we know what we're building on, and that's what gives us the best path.
Yeah. So as you look at this sort of long trajectory, and you talk about sort of gregariousness and people needing to connect in the real world as well as the virtual world, how do you, like, what trends have you seen over time with that? I mean, people who were the people who were working in these executive suites, and did they connect to one another, or did they remain both, kind of isolated? And are people now more willing to connect? Or
I don't think there's been too much difference, honestly. Uh, the great majority of people that came into the first executive suites were legal, accounting, and financial services professionals was a big percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Startup businesses always, and branch offices, usually sales offices, marketing offices, and as technology developed, small technology companies. That's sort of a foundational part. One of the biggest migrations, though, that we've seen is what we refer to just generically as the corporates. Back in the 80s and 90s, if Cisco, let's say, was going to use an executive suite, or the name evolved to business center or serviced office, and now we call them co-working centers. If they were going to use a center back then, they would have been using it tactically. Hey, we got a project in Dallas. We've got to get a team there for 6 months. Oh, get one of those dumb executive suites because we don't want a permanent office.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Cisco looks at their strategic positioning, they say, hey, 25% of all of our employees are contractors. We have 1 to 3 year contracts with them. We don't want 10-year leases on permanent space for 1-year contractors. I know. Let's put them in a co-working center. So they're using our industry strategically based on changes in employment models, which are based on technology. So there's this whole what we call the flexiverse that's come about, and it requires the combination of people, place, and technology together. Changes in management, changes in employment structure, changes in regulation oftentimes. And ultimately what it comes down to, why has Cisco changed to the contracting model? It's more profitable for them, number one. Number two, it impacts their balance sheet quite a bit. Because if you can have a contract with a third of your employees and get those employees into 1-year service agreement offices instead of 10-year leases or purchased offices, the impact on your balance sheet and therefore your shareholder price is substantial. Mm-hmm. So all of these things are underlying foundational drivers to what we're seeing in flexibility and in remote working today. It's not just, it's cool, and it's not just, I couldn't get a job, so I'm an entrepreneur. It's really a lot of underlying issues. And even take our U.S. federal government as an example. And I don't know if I can say this with accuracy, but generally, the one thing that all parties in our government have to agree to every year is a budget. And it's a 1-year budget. Mm-hmm. So why would they want to take on 10, 20, 30-year liabilities in a 1-year budget?
Right, especially when you don't know what the future of your business is.
Right. Exactly, or where it is, and this is what's so important. So even government today is a huge user of our services and centers within our industry, and is one of the actually fastest growing sectors.
Interesting. Yeah. It has since the move has been sort of from a more tactical stance to a more strategic stance, is the makeup of people in these, as we call them now, co-working spaces changed?
Yeah, we have better beards today than we did back in the 90s.
Because back then it was all professions that weren't beard friendly.
No, professions were not beard friendly, and you know, you couldn't go wrong in 1980 by going to work for IBM. As long as you had 3 blue suits, you were okay.
Right, and no beard.
No beard. Oh, good. No facial hair at all. I things have changed, and I think mostly the biggest driver for change is the convenience of work today. You can be working from your home. You can be working from an office. I used to have a really lovely big office, views over the ocean and all this kind of thing. And now I have about 5 little offices just scattered around because really it works better. And today, what the old term for a person in an office working for a company, the real estate term was they're an occupier. Okay. We've been looking at people in the workplace as travelers for about the last 10 years. We don't think of anybody as an occupier anymore. We think of everybody as a traveler. And that's really the way we work today. I worked this morning at Starbucks for a half an hour. I stopped on my way someplace else and worked in a co-working center because I've got a travel card that allows me to go into 50 centers in my city whenever I want to. Then I met at a client's office and they had a desk, and then I had lunch and took my computer with, we're constantly in motion. Very few of us sit at the desk all day long in one location, certainly not 5 days a week or not permanently. If we had a job like that, we'd probably have a stand-up walking desk. We're still a traveler. So things that are needed in business today are different. Reservation system, travel management systems, the software that tracks users and where they are, what their costs were. All of these things are new to the real estate sector, or what was the real estate sector. Now we refer to it as the workplace. And where is your workplace? I don't know. It's anywhere I've got a connection, really. I know I'll be traveling tomorrow. I'll be coming back to New York for 5 or 6 days. And my first office tomorrow will be my car as I drive to the airport. My second office will be the airline lounge, where I'll have an hour's worth of work. My third office will be the plane itself, where I'll have a data connection. When I get off the plane, my fourth office will be a taxi or a car to pick me up, and I'll end up at my hotel. All that time I will have been connected and productive. Where in the 70s, when I was racing yachts and fooling around trying to pretend I knew something about the ocean, I'd get on an airplane, get on a 10-hour flight, be, from the time you left your house until the time you arrived at your destination, you were incommunicado.
Yeah. You
had no idea what was going on in the world. You had no one knew how to reach you. They couldn't reach you, etc. So connectivity is the big change, I think.
Yeah. And it seems like a trend that's just going to continue as we go from 4G to 5G connections, faster, more connected, and also things like self-driving vehicles where you don't even need to focus on the road. You could be working, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for autonomous vehicles.
I can't tell if this is a utopian vision or dystopian vision. We can work all the time, everywhere, all the time.
It's both. No. But let's change that. Let's change one word. We can be productive all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Now, productivity might be personal time.
Yep.
If I didn't have to commute. And I remember I live in the Los Angeles area. Of course, you live in the New York area. So commutes are a pain in the ass. Okay? They just are. And it doesn't matter whether you're connected or not. Yep. Okay? So think of all the added personal time we would have, family time, quality time that we would have. Or if we wanted, we could, instead of calling that family productivity, we could call it business productivity. Oh, wait, we've got the ability to do both. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to look at work, the productivity as necessarily just work. Right. It could be the arts. It could be helping others.
Right.
So many things.
Which is part of the reason that remote work is so often appealing to workers is that without a commute, there isn't this chunk of time of productivity that's taken out of their lives. You know, we have tasks that we need to do at work, but we also have tasks that we need to do at home. And some of them look a lot like the tasks that we need to do at work. We need to research, I don't know, paint colors for repainting the kitchen, or, you know, these things that can be done online, or you know, could happen in the same places that we're getting, you know, we're being productive for work. And so, you know, simply not having a chunk of time taken out of our lives for traveling to and from work is
that's generally not very productive. We're supposed to say, "Oh, that's quiet time," or "I can think while I'm doing that."
Yeah.
You know, thinking in bumper to bumper traffic, I'll tell you what you're thinking about is the guy who's tailgating.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not really quality time.
Yeah.
In that regard. But remote work is funny. We as a company, we're fairly distributed. We have operations in 54 countries around the world, and so we kind of understand remote working from each other. And even our executive team, nobody's in the same city. Our CFO is in Vegas, where we have operations and call centers and stuff. And our head of marketing actually is in Lexington, Kentucky, because that's the lifestyle he likes to lead. And our chief administrative officer is in Monterrey in Mexico. I'm in Newport Beach. And so when we look at our own executive team, we are 100% remote, and we always have been. And one of the things that I think is important is recognizing that to do business, to find the very best people, you shouldn't have to disrupt their life. You know, if somebody loves living in the southeastern U.S. and likes horse country, well, they should live there. They shouldn't have to move to Newport Beach or move to somewhere. They shouldn't disrupt their family and uproot their kids and move away from their parents. So when we think of remote work, I actually think of it the opposite. I think we're using technology to localize our work. None of these people work remotely. They all work locally, and we connect ourselves. And as you start crossing borders and cultures and time zones, that becomes even more important.
Yeah.
Very, very much important. And it's a big cost savings, candidly. You know, remember the day, and this still happens, where somebody says, "Oh, I just got a promotion and I have to move." "Where are you moving?" "Well, I'm moving from Kansas City to Beverly Hills, where my office is." You know, there's a little bit of difference in the cost of housing, dude. And who's going to pay for that? Well, the company's going to pay for that. They bought my house and they're giving me a bonus to buy a new house. And well, who really paid for that? The shareholders of the company in reduced dividends.
Well, and they're offering me a salary that makes it worth it for me to move to Beverly Hills, you know.
Exactly.
And so just I don't think of it oftentimes as a cost savings to allow people to remain where they are, so much as it's a cost increase. Just maybe that's my perspective, having run a distributed company for all this time, you know, that it's a cost increase to ask people to uproot their lives and to need to incentivize that. You need to kind of wow people on the salary front, at least.
Well, you do, and no, you're absolutely right. It is an increase in cost, which, if you can avoid, is an increase in savings. So it's both things simultaneously, I think. And it's very important. When you get into corporate planning, figuring out how to deal with virtual offices and how to deal with the employee or the team member as a traveler, as opposed to as being a static individual, takes a little bit of a leap. Yeah. Not so much today. Generationally, we've got Gen Z coming up. That's our first fully native digital generation, which I'm very excited to interface with. And things are going to change yet again. They too will invent peace and sex, and they too will forget that they stand upon the shoulders of the millennials, and they don't care,
Yeah.
and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Everybody has to have that inventive freedom. But I think we're going to see radical changes in officing that will totally repurpose an awful lot of commercial real estate and even get into a lot of smart city issues and issues around making more space available, particularly in high density markets, and use New York as an example for housing, and maybe making some adjustments in housing costs as a result, because you won't need all those office buildings.
Yeah. I think there'll be a number of shifts happening all at once, and another shift will be you used the term best people to find the best people. You shouldn't have to disrupt their life. It's a real competitive advantage. You can find the best people if you're not tied to your local talent market.
Oh yeah, yeah. You have to. Competitively, everybody's a global company today. You might have 3 people on your team, but you probably have an offshore supplier and an offshore client, and you're using some technology that spans borders and things of that nature. So everybody has to think of being a global company today. And then you shouldn't just limit yourself locally. And once you make that mental breakthrough and get comfortable with it, then truly you can build anything.
Yeah.
We build projects throughout the Middle East and Russia, and we're just starting in Africa this year. And yet we consider ourselves a Newport Beach company. And if you think it's cold in Rhode Island, by the way, you ought to go to Kazan, Russia. The other day it was 32, or I think around 32 below 0 centigrade. 900 miles east of Moscow on the Volga River. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see companies, all those light bulbs going off amongst all the Fortune 500 companies where it hasn't. I mean, we're starting to see departments converting. I'm seeing more and more. Customer service is one where that's happening a lot. Especially customer service that's happening over message boards and, chat online, where, you don't even need to worry about the audio quality, but even more and more companies like Apple are doing phone support with people from home.
Oh, we do. Virtual call centers or contact centers have been around for a while, and that's the person sitting at their kitchen table that's really who you're interfacing with on a chat half the time. We have a virtual call center structure as well inside of our company. The difference is that instead of having people at their residence, we use excess capacity in business and co-working centers from the receptionists. We tie them all into a single system and try and basically get rid of waste. We pay the centers for their unused time of the people, and we put them into our system. So that helps the business or co-working center generate additional revenue. It helps the people to be more productive on site as well. And it reduces our fixed cost, because now we have a variable labor pool. So we actually pay and we charge and pay for those services by the minute, actually in 6-second increments. So my labor pool for our contact center is in 6-second increments.
Wow. Back in the late 80s, I worked in Harvard Square at a Rent-A-Mac place where people could go in, and basically they were going in to print out their resumes. And it was great. I could sit there and read and do a whole lot of nothing. But it sounds like people aren't doing a whole lot of nothing. They don't have much spare time anymore. There's no more receptionists just sort of sitting there.
No,
Yeah.
and you don't want them to. People aren't happy doing nothing, a whole lot of
No,
nothing.
it's true. At a
Uh,
certain point, it feels like you're getting away with something, and it starts to eat at you.
yeah, it's like, oh, I have a real easy job. I don't have to think or do anything.
Yeah, but when my
Oh boy,
manager
how rewarding is
right,
that?
but when my manager realizes that I'm not doing anything, they're going to let me go. And
Absolutely,
it's that
absolutely.
feeling of um, feeling like you need to pretend that you're working.
Oh yeah,
Which
well, the good.
ultimately this is the flip side, right? I had a couple of these jobs over the course of my life, and these were the things that led me to think, I think that inherently people want to be productive. They want to kind of feel their worth, show their worth, and if you trust people, if you respect people, and let them work, they will work. Which the fear about remote work always, especially from conventional legacy managers who've worked in co-located offices for most of their career, is how will I know that people are working? How will I
Mhm.
trust that? And it doesn't take long to realize that you can, and people will work. Um, yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about sort of management trends that you've seen over time. You talked about uh, the idea of sort of presence versus productivity, which is a really interesting concept, that just because people are present doesn't mean they're productive. And as we go, I think in a great way, in a sort of maturing of society kind of way, from focusing on presence and confusing that with productivity to focusing more on results oriented kinds of things, and looking at the productivity itself. This is great. But talk to me about kind of what you've seen over time, and um, that kind of stuff.
Well, if I go back and look at The Office, what do they have that TV show that's called The
Yeah.
Office? I think. Okay, if you remember that, it was all about personalities, right? And everything. Today, if I look at The Office, it's all about data.
Hmm.
It's all about data. You manage by your KPIs. You've got data, which becomes information, which turns into knowledge, which becomes actionable. Okay, so everything is data driven because we can collect so much information and define our metrics so easily. And when you're talking about productivity, a minute ago, saying that people liked to be productive, I also think people, at least I think people like to be quantified. They like to know how productive they were and what their productivity meant and how it relates to others. So the use of data to drive the metrics, to understand that, is a major change, I think, that I've seen over the last 50 odd years that I've been in business. God, I'm sounding old, aren't I? It's I'm sounding old, yet I'm the one that's all excited about Gen Z. So
That's good.
we're
That's good.
we're going to see officing change. And by 2022, 23, you're going to walk into your workstation, your workplace, wherever it is, slip on your headset, your haptic gloves, and enter your office virtually. Virtual reality officing will start to become the norm around 2022, 23. And by 32, 33, there will be nothing else. And when that happens, the way we communicate will be through holoportation. You and I would actually be sitting in the same room for this conversation instead of both looking at a Zencaster screen. We'd be sitting in the same room virtually. It could be a third-party room. It could be each of our individual rooms. I could design my office and have you come into my virtual reality office, which, if you think about it, why is real estate in Manhattan so expensive? Well, because there's a limited amount of it. right? And if you want a big office with a overlooking Central Park, first, you're going to really pay for it. Second, it's even then it's hard to get overall. But if you could just slip on a headset and be in that same facsimile of an office and have the rendering, which is coming from the gaming companies at such speed right now, then you really don't need to be there. You can be in Brooklyn or the Bronx. So that building that is very, very expensive for officing no longer has the same value for the quality, because you can have that big office overlooking Central Park, but you're in the Bronx.
Wow.
And people can come and go from that office now. And so when you look at Gen Z, and this is why I'm pretty excited about it, that's our digital generation. What's their big thing? Video games, right? That's been the huge driver. I mean, we've even got wonderful professional athletic leagues now in video gaming. E-game series. We're going to have e-game Olympics soon. Okay. As all of this comes along, but as this generation starts to mature, they finish high school, which they're doing now, enter and finish college. A lot of them won't go to college now. The time they spend on video games is going to be reduced. They're still going to be engaged. They're still going to be using video technology for entertainment purposes. But their time commitment is going to be less. And so those gaming companies are saying, well, where are they going to be? Oh, they're going to be working. I know. Instead of League of Legends, let's have the lipstick building in New York. Let's build virtual real estate. And that's what's starting to happen. We have virtual cities being built where you can actually buy and sell space, where you can build shops. Virtual real estate will become a big part of the commercial real estate industry, and our company will be selling not necessarily so much space, still some space, but not as much. We'll be selling software that provides this sort of work environment. And that's something that you say what generationally will be changing. This is an absolute. If you don't think so, just look at Microsoft's new holoportation devices.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Boy, there's a whole lot of stuff around that. So it's really interesting to think of the effect, if you follow this thread, the effect that virtual reality would have on physical real estate, where, it's not so important that where you are physically needs to be as connected as it was in the past. I mean, that's
well, it's what the old adage about real estate: location, location, location.
Yeah.
Guess what the new one is? Bandwidth, bandwidth, bandwidth. Location doesn't matter anymore. Okay, now if you want to walk out, have a beautiful park in Central Park to go to during lunch, if you want to have nice restaurants to eat at next to your office, well, of course, locations are going to be
It's important to remember what you can and can't do in virtual reality. You can't eat in virtual reality.
Are you sure?
Well, you could go to the restaurant and maybe you would eat the food delivery in the atmosphere of the restaurant. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to say, okay, let's take that string a little bit further. We walk into the restaurant together, and we order, and within 15 minutes, the order is delivered to us.
Right.
That's all happening.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right now. The order delivery processes. There's so many delivery processes. We're looking at one right now, and we look at all the delivery drivers, and then you look at their time and you think of waste. They're not real busy between about 9 and 11:30, and they're not real busy between about 2:30 and 5, and then they're not busy again after 7. All the Ubers and all the drivers, they have these hot times of day and dead times of day. Well, those dead times of day now, they're delivering other things, just like we use the virtual call center concept. Well, now these delivery drivers are delivering packages or delivering food. All these things are coming about So just in time, everything is what we're going to be dealing with in the future, so that you can go to a virtual lunch together in your holoportation structure.
Well, I'm going to have to rethink everything.
Good. That's why you brought the old guy on, right?
I guess so, Frank. Wow. We got in all kinds of stuff here. So what, I guess, if we're talking about virtual reality, what are the other sort of flabbergasting kinds of things that you're thinking about around all of this? Like what else do you foresee changing that people will need to kind of prepare themselves for?
Well, I think a collaboration in the workplace is changing. Historically, we collaborated by meeting around the water cooler during a coffee break or something of that nature. Then we started collaborating always in conference and meeting rooms, things of that nature. Today, we're collaborating online using everything from old video systems of the late 70s, early 80s to the web-based systems we all use today constantly. We're going to see more and more collaboration, an open collaboration, to where you'll be seeing skill set collaboration structures. We have a skill set sharing structure that we're playing with right now, and where you'll basically have people on the same system or in the same skills community. And you might be an attorney and I might be an accountant, someone else might be a marketing company, et cetera. But we'll all be part of the same skills sharing community, and we'll collaborate back and forth trading virtual currencies, which is a good way to avoid taxation, by the way. You don't have to make money to hire an attorney and pay with after-tax dollars if you're just collaborating back and forth. So there's a whole number of issues that will come up on skills sharing and barter systems that have been around forever, literally forever. The first cavemen bartered, an arrowhead for a mastodon steak. That's not.
You just can't get a good mastodon steak anymore.
Well, you can, but they're frozen. I hear they're frozen. They're up in the tundra.
It's about just east of Moscow. Yeah.
Yeah, just east of Moscow, right. I could go all sorts of strange places with that and won't. But we will see a more open collaboration and large-scale collaboration communities, and that's going to become a big part of ongoing business models, I think, even more so than it is today. Crowdsourcing information is popular right now. We're going to see a big refinement of that, and that's going to be built around physical communities that have a certain software sets, and it's going to also create more definition to those communities. And community and the concept of community has become a watchword in real estate. We don't have occupiers. Heaven forbid we call them tenants, and I'm a landlord. We have communities, and communities all have members. And the membership and how you interact with that membership, which we used to call networking. So that's not much of a physical change or an activity change, just a name change a little bit. But the way we think of that community and how open we are in sharing with it is changing. And again, we'll see more and more common technology systems feeding those communities. There's a beautiful one based over in the Netherlands right now called Serendipity Labs that Serendipity Machine, that basically it's a free use of space, free use of everything, and you pay for it all with social capital only. And it's an emerging business model that's very interesting to follow. is what's the value of social capital, and it's really that community sharing, skill set sharing issue. That's what we do. We created the All Good Workspace Foundation a few years ago, and what we do with the foundation, it's a public charity, is we take the vacancy factor from within the business center and co-working industry, and we donate it to charity. So I know at any point in time that there's going to be 7 to 12% vacancy in a typical business or co-working center. Good market, bad market, good economy, bad economy. That's the range it's going to run in. Well, if I ask the owner of that facility to donate half of their vacancy factor to charity through our foundation, real estate as an expense is usually the second highest expense after raising of capital for all charities. So if we can take the second highest expense and remove it from charities and at the same time put vacancy to good use, unused space to good use, think of all of the unused commercial office space in the half of the vacancy factor in New York City. Right now, we have about 200 facilities nationally that are donating their space in this format, and we're growing it constantly. So, again, talk about cultural changes, getting rid of waste. In France now, it's illegal for grocery stores to dispose of food. Now, I'm not always one to follow the French politically with their laws and things, but they basically said, we're not going to allow waste. That food now has to be donated. Once it reaches this expiration, something has to be done with it. You can't just throw it away. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Especially a good thing with real estate. Because, it's like an airline seat. A day passes and it wasn't occupied. Well, then you've lost that forever. And so we think that we can not just change the way people work, but we think we can change the world that we all work within. Yeah,
it's interesting stuff. And it sounds like you're coming at it with a lot of experience and some really interesting perspectives. Before we start to wrap up, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to mention?
Well, I think that one of our core businesses is virtual officing, alliancevirtualoffices.com. And in that business, we've created reservations and booking systems for meeting room requirements globally. Again, we look at the workplace as a place to service travelers. And we also know that a lot of people that are remote workers, they actually need a commercial address. I'll give you a good example. If you and I want to form a company tomorrow, which I'm open to doing if you want, I mean, why not, right? We both have interesting backgrounds. If we wanted to open a company and we go into the bank and say, well, we're going to use Frank's address and we're going to use Jeff's cell phone for our company. We couldn't get, we probably couldn't get a bank account, but we couldn't get any corporate credit. No way. You have to have a commercial address with a landline phone in order to get through the credit rating processes that the banks use.
That's gotten
even
better
if you're a small
in the
entrepreneur,
past 10 years. In 2006, when I started Lullabot, that was certainly the case. And it was really very difficult. There were just, the thing I used to say is that there just weren't boxes to check on these forms, for we don't have an office or those kinds of things. I think a fair amount of that stuff has gotten better. But you're...
Well, we're actually seeing a backlash in that.
It's flipped back again. That makes sense.
Yeah, it actually is flipping back because know your customer, bank credit reporting requirements now have really strengthened. And part of that is driven, know your customer issues. A part of that is driven by anti-terrorism, security, anti-fraud provisions that are in the laws now, and probably should be, some of them at least. And so if we're going to create an entity, that entity must by law have a registered agent. That entity must have an address. That address should match what that industry's business is from an SIC code point of view, from a zoning purposes, and that entity will have to be able to get a business license. In order to do all of that, you have to have a physical commercial address 99% of the time, and you have to have a telephone number. It'll be a VoIP number today, not an old copper line. But you do have to have a telephone number that matches into that address if you're going to get commercial credit.
And for a lot of people running fully distributed company, they end up in a position where their home address becomes the corporate address, and then that gets published everywhere. And every so often you get people with stories of like someone showing up at their front door just to inquire about a job.
Oh yes. So that happens, and honestly, if you start reading into the law too, we form entities to protect ourselves from liabilities. Basically, the term of the corporate veil. Well, if you're using your personal cell phone and you're using your home as the address for an entity, the corporate veil just got about 10 times thinner. Okay, you are really not a separate entity. You really are a proprietorship. And so there's a lot of things from a credit point of view, from a liability point of view, from a convenience point of view. Plus, you don't want your neighbor, who's the plumber, having 14 trucks parked in front of his house. There's all of those issues that come along. So virtual officing in our industry solves all of those problems, and yet does so at an incredibly reduced cost over conventional space. And it meets the needs.
Even more than that, it's sympathetic to the situation. The idea of, hey, can we set up this location as our corporate location is not something that's going to be anathema. It's not going to be a new weird idea. Any given location may or may not do that, but they will have heard of it before.
Oh yes, absolutely. Well, it's funny when someone calls and I don't care who it is, they want to do business, or we're going to do business with them. The first thing I do is look at their address and run it through Google Maps, and I look at a street view. Is that a real person and a real company, or is that the backside of somebody's house?
Is it a UPS store?
Okay. Yeah. Is it a UPS store? Exactly. So, like I said, data is what's changing. So I have access to that data now, which 10 years ago I didn't have access to.
Yeah.
So I can make a more informed decision about who I want to do business with. And the way you position yourself in business today is critical in that regard, particularly for startups. They think, we're a startup. Let's see, Bill Gates started in a garage. Yeah, no,
for long.
Didn't stay there very long, though. Yeah, I didn't stay there too long. It's that sort of thing that is changing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, if people wanted to follow up with questions for you or new ideas, business opportunities, where should they get in touch with you?
The easiest thing is my email address, my direct email address. It's posted all over, so there's no hiding. And that's fcottle, Cottle, at abcn.com.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's always really interesting to bring on people with new perspectives and new ways of looking at this same kinds of stuff. And I have to say, this is the first time we've really dug into virtual reality in particular. So it's great. It's great that you're thinking about all this, and like I said, coming at it with so much perspective. So that's great. Thank you.
Well, we're happy to help and spread the word. And actually, if anyone has a new idea and is looking for investment, they can go to the futureofworkfunds.com. And this is our private equity group that we do invest in prop
Great.
tech.
Yeah. Well, this is we've got a lot of people listening to this podcast who are thinking about and rethinking work. So, great.
Well, I'll be speaking at the Future Workplace Summit on Monday and Tuesday of next week in New York. So that's another place that people can go.
Super. Thanks, Frank.
My pleasure.